So guilt is a very normal and natural part of life. A healthy sense of guilt lets you know when you've done something that goes against your personal moral code, and it's an opportunity to take responsibility, learn from it, and move forward. It's a signal that you've done something that doesn't fit with how you feel you should act. Without some sense of guilt to guide you, you'd never know if you were doing right or wrong. It's essential that you have a good sense of guilt, but at a healthy level. The more empathic and sensitive you are, the more you'll tend to experience feelings of guilt. You may feel guilty even when you know you haven't really done anything wrong. This can come from low self-esteem and an unhealthy need to please others at the cost of your own happiness. Low self-esteem and self-judgement will transform rational, healthy, guilty thoughts into distressing, guilty feelings. Overthinking will only feed these thoughts and grow them even more. And it's easy to see how guilt can go from being that essential guide that keeps us from breaking our personal moral codes into the cruel self-punisher that leaves us racked with hurtful, guilty feelings. An abusive or manipulative person may take advantage of your guilty complex. They may project their own guilty feelings onto you as a way of avoiding facing their own guilt. They may also guilt trip you as a way of coercing you into doing what they want you to do. Having a guilty complex will leave you wide open to abuse from others. Sometimes guilt can occur when we're trying to make sense of something that seems impossible to understand. After a loss or a bereavement, there's often a sense of guilt. This is a normal part of the grief process. However, this healthy guilt can quickly turn into a damaging and unhealthy type of guilt. When a sense of guilt starts to affect how you see yourself and how you value yourself, it becomes shame. Guilt is feeling bad about what you did, and shame is feeling bad about who you are. You may feel that you're a bad person because you did something bad or you made a mistake. It's so important to know that good people are allowed to make mistakes and do bad things. Doing a bad thing doesn't mean that you're a bad person. You have the right to make a mistake, accept it for what it was, take responsibility, learn from it, and move forward. When you start to feel unhealthy and distressing, guilty feelings, it's because you're feeling overly responsible for something. You're taking on more of the burden of responsibility than you need to. In some cases, maybe you don't actually have any responsibility at all. What is it that you're feeling guilty for? How much of the responsibility over that situation is actually yours? So there's a tool that I use in my counselling work called the responsibility pie. It's a way of reframing the individual sense of responsibility that underlies guilty feelings. It's a way of looking at your guilt from a different perspective. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to use a completely fictional scenario of a situation where a person is feeling immense and distressing guilt. So any resemblance to any real situation or people is purely coincidental. So my fictitious client, Mandy, has been feeling very guilty lately. She's had a row with her sister over the care of their elderly father. She felt that her sister wasn't doing enough to help with the care. Her sister Jane is single and has no children, and she works part-time, while Mandy has 2 young children and works full-time. Although Jane has more available time, Mandy feels that it's her who does the greater share of the caring for their father. So during the row with Jane, Mandy asserted herself and told Jane that she's selfish and could do a lot more to help. Jane reacted very defensively and is now not talking to her. Mandy feels very guilty that she's hurt her sister, and Mandy's assumed 100% responsibility for Jane's hurt feelings. She's consumed with guilt and feels terrible. So let's use the responsibility pie to look at Mandy's situation. So this is the blank pie, which I've titled Responsibility for Jane's Hurt Feelings. I asked Mandy what else was going on in this situation. Mandy admits that part of the responsibility could be with Jane. Jane's defensiveness and her own guilty feelings for not taking her fair share of their father's care could account for a chunk of this responsibility pie. how much of the pie would that part take up? Mandy says around half. So I colour in half of the pie and name this Jane's responsibility for the way she reacted. So what else was going on at the time that affected the situation? Mandy admits that other members of the family have sided with Jane, and that's made her feel even more guilty. How much of the pie would this take up? Jane says this is about a quarter of the pie. So I colour in another quarter of the pie and name this part other family members siding with Jane. At this current point, Mandy is able to see that 75%, 3/4 of the guilt she was feeling isn't really hers to feel. The responsibility for hurting her sister is not what she thought it was at all. We now look at anything else that's left over and any other responsibility over the situation that may not be Mandy's to own. So Mandy talks about how she feels that she asserted herself with Jane for the first time ever. She can see how some of the responsibility is hers, and she's able to own that, but she says that she sees that she doesn't have to feel as guilty as she did, and she has a right to assert herself. At this point, she suggests that some of the pie could be filled in around the fact that she's never been able to assert herself, and because this was her first attempt, she was maybe a little too nasty in the way she spoke to her sister. Some of the responsibility is still hers to own, but the factor of this being her first time asserting herself like this is a factor in the way her sister took the message and heard her words. I ask her how much of a slice she feels this would take up. She suggests just a little, maybe about 10%, another 10%. So I shade in this extra 10% of the pie and call this part Mandy's first time at asserting herself. The pie now suggests that although Mandy does have some responsibility in hurting Jane, her true responsibility only stands at around 15%. This 15% that's coloured in yellow here. So when you're able to reframe guilt in this way, you see the true part that you had to play. Unhealthy guilt says that you're 100% responsible or mostly responsible for the situation, but a reframed, healthier view of your level of responsibility tells a very different story. The responsibility pie is a simple exercise that you can use to reframe your own guilty feelings and start to feel them in a healthier way. It's a way to help you to see that while you need to own some of the responsibility for something, you don't have to own it all. It brings back some balance and takes some of that pressure off. I hope this video has helped you to deal with your guilt and see it in a different way. I hope that it's given you some good strategies for dealing with your unhealthy guilt head on and reframing it into a healthier feeling of a fair responsibility. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel for all my latest updates, and let me know what you think in the comments below.